Good Indian Part 2 by B.N. Bauer. Chapter 21. Somebody Shot Saunders. The hot days dropped, one by one, into the past like fiery beads upon a velvety black cord. Miss Georgie told them silently in the meager little office, and sighed as they slipped from under her white, nervous fingers. 1. Nothing happened that could be said to bear upon the one big subject in her mind, the routine work of passing trains and dribbling business in the express and freight departments, and a long afternoon of heat and silence save for the asthmatic pump 50 yards down the main track. 2. This exactly like the first, except that those inseparables, Hagar, Vinnie, and Lucy, whom Miss Georgie had inelegantly dubbed the Three Greases, appeared, silent, blanket enshrouded, and perspiring, at the office door in mid-afternoon. Half a box of soggy chocolates, which the heat had rendered a dismally sticky mass, won from them, smiles and half-intelligible speech. Fishing was poor, no ketchum. 3. Not even the diversion of the squaws to make her forget the dragging hours. Nothing, she told herself apathetically, when that third day had slipped upon the black cord of a soft, warm night, star-sprinkled and unutterably lonely as it brooded over the desert. On the morning of the fourth day, Miss Georgie woke with the vague sense that something had gone wrong. True railroader as she had come to be, she thought first that there had been a wreck and that she was wanted at the telegraph instrument. She was up and partly dressed before the steps and the voices which had broken her sleep had reached her door. Pete Hamilton's voice, trembling with excitement, called to her. "What is it? What has happened?" she cried from within, beset by 100 wild conjectures. "Saunders. Somebody shot Saunders. Wire for a doctor, quick as you can." "He ain't dead yet, but he's going to, sure. Hurry up and wire. Somebody at the..." Store called to him, and he broke off to run lumberingly in answer to the summons. Miss Georgie made haste to follow him. Saunders was lying upon a blanket on the store platform, and Miss Georgie shuddered as she looked at him. He was pasty white, and his eyes looked glassy under his half-closed lids. He had been shot in the side at the stable. He had gasped out when Pete found him lying in the trail just back of the store. Now he seemed beyond speech, and the little group of section hands, the Chinese cook at the section house, and the Swede foreman, and Pete seemed quite at a loss what to do. "Take him in and put him to bed," Miss Georgie commanded, turning away. "See if he's bleeding yet, and, well, I should put a cold compress on the wound, I think. I'll send for a doctor, but he can't get here till 9 o'clock unless you want to stand the expense of a special. And by that time..." Saunders moved his head a trifle and lifted his heavy lids to look at her, which so unnerved Miss Georgie that she turned and ran to the office. When she had sent the message, she sat drumming upon the table while she waited for an answer. Gra and hair. Fingers had spelled when she became conscious of the fact, flushed hotly, and folded her hands tightly together in her lap. "The doctor will come Hawkinson, I sent for," she announced later to Pete, holding out the telegram. She glanced reluctantly at the wrinkled blanket where Saunders had lain, caught a corner of her underlip between her teeth, and, bareheaded though she was, went down the steps and along the trail to the stable. "I've nearly an hour before I need open the office," she said to herself, looking at her watch. She did not say what she meant to do with that hour, but she spent a quarter of it examining the stable and everything in it. Especially did she search the loose sandy soil and its vicinity for tracks. finally she lifted her skirts, as a woman instinctively does at a street crossing, and struck off through the sagebrush, her eyes upon a line of uncertain footsteps, as of a drunken man reeling that way. They were not easy to follow, or they would not have been if she had not felt certain of the general direction which they must take. More than once she lost sight of them for several rods, but she always picked them up farther along. At one place she stopped, and stood perfectly still, her skirts held back tightly with both hands, while she stared fascinatedly at a red smear upon a broken branch of sage and the smooth-packed hollow in the sand where he must have lain. "He's got nerve, I'll say that much for him," she observed aloud, and went on. The footprints were plain where he crossed the grade road near the edge of the bluff, but from there on it was harder to follow them because of the grate. Patches of black lava rock lying even with the surface of the ground, where a dozen men might walk abreast and leave no sign that the untrained eye, at least, could detect. "This is a case for Indians," she mused, frowning over an open space where all was rock. Injun Charlie would hunt tracks all day for $1 or $2, only he'd make tracks just to prove himself the real goods. She sighed, stood upon her tiptoes, and peered out over the sage to get her bearings, then started on at a hazard. She went a few rods, found herself in a thick tangle of brush through which she could not force her way, started to back out, and caught her hair on a scraggly scrub which seemed to have as many prongs as there are briars on a rosebush. She was struggling there with her hands fumbling unavailingly at the back of her bowed head when she was pounced upon by someone or something through the sage. She screamed. "The deuce!" Good Indian brought out the milder expletive with the flat intonation which the unexpected presence of a lady frequently gives to a man's speech. "Lucky I didn't take a shot at you through the bushes. I did, almost, when I saw somebody moving here. Is this your favorite place for a morning ramble?" He had one hand still upon her arm, and he was laughing openly at her plight. But he sobered when he stooped a little so that he could see her face, for there were tears in her eyes, and Miss Georgie was not the sort of young woman whom one expects to shed tears for slight cause. "If you did it, and you must have, I don't see how you can laugh about it, even if he is a crawling reptile of a man that ought to be hung." The tears were in her voice as well as her eyes, and there were reproach and disappointment also. Did what to whom to where, to why? Good Indian let go her arm and began helpfully striving with the scraggly scrub and its prongs. "Say, I'll just—" "about have to scalp you to get you loose. Would you mind very much, squaw? Talk far off?" He ducked and peered into her face again, and again his face sobered. "What's the matter?" he asked in an entirely different tone which Miss Georgie, in spite of her mood, found less satisfying than his banter. "Saunders Ouch. I'd as soon be scalped and done with as to have you pull out a hair at a time." Saunders crawled home with a bullet in his ribs. "And I thought, Saunders—" Good Indian stared down at her, his hands dropped upon her head. Miss Georgie reached up, caught him by the wrists, and held him so, while she tilted her head that she might look up at him. "Grant!" she cried softly. "He deserved it. You couldn't help it. He would have shot you down like a dog. Just because he was hired to do it, or because of some hold over him. Don't think I blame you, or that anyone would if they knew the truth. I came out to see, I just had to make sure, but you must get away from here. You shouldn't have stayed so long." Miss Georgie gave a most unexpected sob and stopped, that she might grit her teeth in anger over it. "You think I shot him?" As Good Indian said it, the sentence was merely a statement, rather than an accusation or a reproach. "I don't blame you. I suspected he was the man up here with the rifle. That day, that first day, When you told me about someone shooting at you, he came over to the station, and I saw 2 or 3 scraps of sage sticking under his shirt collar as if he had been out in the brush. You know how it breaks off in stakes when you go through it. And he said he had been asleep, and there isn't any sage where a man would have to go through it unless he got right out in it, away from the trails. I thought then that he was the man. You didn't tell me. And this time he spoke reproachfully. It was after you had left that I saw it, and I did go down to the ranch to tell you. But you were so occupied in other directions. She let go his wrists and began fumbling at her hair, and she bowed her head again so that her face was hidden from him. You could have told me anyway, Good Indian said constrainedly. You didn't want her to know. I couldn't, before her. And I didn't want to hurt her. By Miss Georgie fumbled more with her words than with her hair. Well, there's no use arguing about that. Good Indian also found that subject a difficult one. You say he was shot. Did he say he wasn't able to talk when I saw him? Pete said Saunders claimed he was shot at the stable, but I know that to be a lie. Miss Georgie spoke with unfeeling. Exactness. That was to save himself in case he got well, I suppose. I believe the man is going to die if he hasn't already. He had the look I've seen them in wrecks. And I know. He won't talk. He can't. But there'll be an investigation, and Baumgartner, I suspect, will be just as willing to get you in this way as in any other. More so, maybe, because a murder is always awkward to handle. I can't see why he should want to murder me. Good Indian took her hands away from her hair and set himself again to the work of freeing her. You've been fudging around till you got about 10 million more hairs wound up, he grumbled. Wow, are you deliberately torturing me? She complained, winking with the pain of his good intentions. I don't believe he does want to murder you. I think that was just Saunders trying to make a dandy good job of it. He doesn't like you anyway. Witness the way you bawled him out that day you roped Ow. Roped. The dog. Baumgartner may have wanted him to keep an eye on you. My heavens, man, do you think you're plucking a goose? I wouldn't be surprised, he retorted, grinning a little. Honest, I'm trying to go easy, but this infernal bush has sure got a stranglehold on you, and your hair is so fluffy it's a deuce of a job. You keep wriggling and getting it caught in new places. If you could only manage to stand still. But I suppose you can't. By the way, he remarked casually after a short silence, save for an occasional squeal from Miss Georgie, speaking of Saunders, I didn't shoot him. Miss Georgie looked up at him to the further entanglement of her hair. You didn't it? Then who did? Search Emmy, he offered figuratively and briefly. Well, I will. Miss Georgie spoke with a certain decisiveness, and reaching out a sage-soiled hand, took his gun from the holster at his hip. He shrank away with a man's instinctive dislike of having anyone make free with his weapons, but it was a single movement which he controlled instantly. Stand still, can't you? He admonished, and kept at work while she examined the gun with the dexterity and ease of every motion which betrayed her perfect familiarity with firearms. She snapped the cylinder into place, sniffed daintily at the end of the barrel, and slipped the gun back into its scabbard. Don't think I doubted your word, she said, casting a slanting glance up at him without moving her head. But I wanted to be able to swear positively. If I should happen to be dragged into the witness box, I hope it won't be by the hair of the head. That your gun has not been fired this morning, unless you carry a cleaning rod with you, she added, which would hardly be likely. You may search me if you like, Good Indian suggested, and for an engaged young man, and one deeply in love withal, he displayed a contentment with the situation which was almost reprehensible. No use. If you did pack one with you, you'd be a fool not to throw it away after you had used it. No, I'll swear to the gun as it is now. Are you ever going to get my hair loose? I'm due at the office right this minute. I'll bet a molasses cookie." She looked at her watch and groaned. "I'd have to telegraph myself back to get there on time now," she said. 24. That fast freight is due in 18 minutes exactly. I've got to be there. Take your jackknife and cut what won't come loose. Really, I mean it, Mr. Empson. I was under the impression that my name is Grant to friends. My name is Dennis if I don't beat that freight, she retorted curtly. Take your knife and give me a haircut quick. I can do it a different way and cover up the place. Oh, all right, but it's a shame to leave a nice bunch of hair like this hanging on a bush. Tell me, what were you doing up here, Grant, and what are you going to do now? We haven't much time, and we've been fooling when we should have been discussing ways and means. Well, I got up early, and someone took a shot at me again. This time he clipped my hat brim. He took off his hat and showed her where the brim had a jagged tear half an inch deep. I ducked, and made up my mind I'd get him this time or know the reason why. So I rode up the other way and back behind the orchard and struck the grade below the point of rocks, and so came up here hunting him. I kept pretty well out of sight. We've done that before. Jack and I took sneak yesterday and came up here at sunrise, but we couldn't find anything. I was beginning to think he had given it up. So I was just scouting around here when I heard you rustling the bushes over here. I was going to shoot, but I changed my mind and thought I'd land on you and trust to the lessons I got in football and the gun. And the rest, he declaimed whimsically. You know. Now, duck away down. Oh, wait a minute. He gave a jerk at the knot of his neckerchief, flipped out the folds, spread it carefully over her head, and tied it under her chin, patting it into place and tucking stray locks under as if he rather enjoyed doing it. Better wear it till you're out of the brush, he advised, if you don't want to get hung up somewhere again. She stood up straight, with a long, deep sigh of relief. Now, Pikeway, he smiled, and don't run bareheaded through the bushes again. You still got time to beat that train. And about Saunders, don't worry. I can get to the ranch without being seen, and no one will know I was up here, unless you tell them. Oh, I shall, of course. Miss Georgie chose to be very sarcastic. I think I shall wire the information to the sheriff. Don't come with me and leave tracks all over the country. Keep on the lava rock. Haven't you got any sense at all? You made tracks yourself, madam, and you've left a fine lot of incriminating evidence on that bush. I'll have to waste an hour picking off the hair, so they won't accuse you of shooting Saunders. Good Indians spoke lightly, but they both stopped nevertheless and eyed the offending bush anxiously. You haven't time, Miss Georgie decided. I can easily get around that if it's put up to me. You go on back. Really, you must, her eyes implored him. Oh, very well. We haven't met this morning. Goodbye, squaw. Talk far off. I'll see you later, perhaps. Miss Georgie still had that freight heavy on her conscience, but she stood and watched him stoop under an overhanging branch and turn his head to smile reassuringly back at her. Then, with a pungent stirring of sage odors, the bushes closed in behind him, and it was as if he had never been there at all. Whereupon Miss Georgie once more gathered her skirts together and ran to the trail, and down that to the station. She met a group of squaws who eyed her curiously, but she was looking once more at her watch and paid no attention, although they stood huddled in the trail staring after her. She remembered that she had left the office unlocked, and she rushed in and sank panting into the chair before her telegraph table just as the smoke of the fast freight swirled around the nose of the low, sage-covered hill to the west. Chapter 22. a bit of paper. Good Indian came out upon the rim rock, looked down upon the ranch beneath him, and knew, by various little movements about the place, that breakfast was not yet ready. Jean was carrying 2 pails of milk to the house, and Wally and Jack were watering the horses that had been stabled overnight. He was on the point of shouting down to them when his arm was caught tightly from behind. He wheeled about and confronted Rachel. Clothed all in dull gray she was, like a savage young Quakeress. Even the red ribbons were gone from her hair, which was covered by the gray blanket wrapped tightly around her slim body. She drew him back from the rim of the bluff. "You no shout," she murmured gravely. "No let 'em see you here. You go quick catch 'em you Caius, go to ranch. You no tell 'em you be this place." Good Indian stood still and looked at her. She stood with her arms folded in her blanket, regarding him with a certain yearning steadfastness. "You all time think why," she said, shrewdly reading his thoughts. "I no take shame. I glad." She flushed and looked away to the far side of the snake. "Bad mans, no more try for shoot you, Mebizo." I heap. Good Indian reached out and caught her by both shoulders. "Rachel, if you did that, don't tell me about it." "Don't tell me anything. I don't ask you. I don't want to know." He spoke rapidly, in the grip of his first impulse to shield her from what she had done. But he felt her begin to tremble under his fingers, and he stopped as suddenly as he had begun. "You no glad? You think shame for me? You think I all time very bad." Tragedy was in her voice and in her great dark eyes. Good Indian gulped. "No, Rachel, I don't think that. I want to help you out of this if I can, and I meant that if you didn't tell me anything about it, why I wouldn't know." "Anything about it, you sob?" "I sob." Her lips curved into a pathetic little smile. "I sobe. You know all what I do. You know for why me think 'em. You think shame. I no take shame. I do for you no get killed dead. All time man that coughs try for shoot 'em you. All time I try for." She broke off to stare questioningly up into his face. "I no tell. You no like for tell," she said quietly. "All same you go, you catch 'em you hoss, you go ranch. I think Sheriff man's Mapiso come pretty quick. No find out you be here. I no like you be here this time." Good Indian turned, yielding to the pleading of her eyes. The heart of him ached dully with the weight of what she had done and with an uneasy comprehension of her reason for doing it. He walked as quickly as the rough ground would permit along the bluff toward the grade, and she, with the instinctive deference to the male which is the heritage of primitive woman, followed soft-footedly 2 paces behind him. Once, where the way was clear, he stopped and waited for her to come alongside, but Rachel stopped and waited also, her eyes hungrily searching his face with the look a dog has for his master. Good Indian read the meaning of that look and went on, and turned no more toward her until he reached his horse. "You'd better go on to camp and stay there, Rachel," he said, as casually as he could. "No trouble will come to you." He hesitated, biting his lip and plucking absently the tangles from the forelock of his horse. "You sab grateful?" he asked finally. And when she gave a quick little nod, he went on. "Well, I'm grateful to you. You did what a man would do for his friend. I sabe. I'm heap grateful, and I'll not forget it. All time I'll be your friend. Goodbye." He mounted and rode away. He felt just then that it was the kindest thing he could do. He looked back once, just as he was turning into the grade road. She was. standing, her arms folded in her gray blanket where he had left her. His fingers tightened involuntarily the reins so that Kino stopped and eyed his master inquiringly. But there was nothing that he might say to her. It was not words that she wanted. He swung his heels against Kino's flanks and rode home. Evadna rallied him upon his moodiness at breakfast, pouted a little because he remained preoccupied under her teasing, and later was deeply offended because he would not tell her where he had been or what was worrying him. "I guess you better send word to the doctor he needn't come," the pup man put his head in at the office door to say, just as the freight was pulling away from the water tank. "Saunders died a few minutes ago. Pete says you better notify the coroner and I reckon the sheriff too. Pretty tough to be shot down like that in broad daylight." "I think I'd rather be shot in daylight than in the dark," Miss Georgie snapped. Unreasonably, because her nerves were all a jangle and sent the messages as requested. Saunders was neither a popular nor a prominent citizen, and there was none to mourn beside him. Peter Hamilton, as his employer and a man whose emotions were easily stirred, was shocked a shade lighter as to his complexion and a tone lower as to his voice perhaps, and was heard to remark frequently that it was a terrible thing. But the chief emotion which the tragedy roused was curiosity and that fluttering excitement which attends death in any form. A dozen Indians hung about the store, the squaws peering inquisitively in at the uncurtained window of the lean to where the bed held a long, immovable burden with a rumpled sheet over it, and the bucks listening stolidly to the futile gossip on the store porch. Pete Hamilton, anxious that the passing of his unprofitable servant should be marked by decorum if not by grief, mentally classed the event with Election Day in that he refused to sell any liquor until the sheriff and coroner arrived. He also, after his first bewilderment had passed, conceived the idea that Saunders had committed suicide and explained to everyone who would listen just why he believed it. Saunders was sickly, for one thing. For another, Saunders never seemed to get any good out of living. He had read everything he could get his hands on, and though Pete did not say that Saunders chose to die when the stock of paper novels was exhausted, he left that impression upon his auditors. The sheriff and the coroner came at 9. All the Hart boys, including Donnie, were there before noon, and the group of Indians remained all day wherever the store cast its shadow. Squaws and bucks passed and repassed upon the footpath between Hartley and their camp, chattering together of the big event until they came under the eye of strange white men, whereupon they were stricken deaf and dumb, as is the way of our nation's wards. When the sheriff inspected the stable and its vicinity, looking for clues, not a blanket was in sight, though a dozen eyes watched every movement suspiciously. When at the inquest that afternoon, he laid upon the table a battered old revolver of cheap workmanship and long past its prime, and testified that he had found it 10 feet from the stable door, in a dew line southeast from the hay corral, and that one shot had been fired from it. There were Indians in plenty to glance furtively at the weapon and give damn tentative. The coroner showed the bullet which he had extracted from the body of Saunders and fitted it into the empty cartridge which had been under the hammer in the revolver, and thereby proved to the satisfaction of everyone that the gun was intimately connected with the death of the man. So the jury arrived speedily, and without further fussing over evidence, at the verdict of suicide. Good Indian drew a long breath, put on his hat, and went over to tell Miss Georgie. The Hart boys lingered for a few minutes at the store and then rode on to the ranch without him, and the Indians stole away over the hill to their camp. The coroner and the sheriff accepted Pete's invitation into the back part of the store, refreshed themselves after the ordeal, and caught the next train for Shoshone. So closed the incident of Saunders' passing, so far as the law was concerned. Well, Miss Georgie summed up the situation. Bomberger hasn't made any sign of taking up the matter. I don't believe now that he will. I wired the news to the papers in Shoshone, so he must know. I think perhaps he's glad to get Saunders out of the way, for he certainly must have known enough to put Bomberger behind the bars. But I don't see, she said, in a puzzled way, how that gun came onto the scene. I looked all around the stable this morning, and I could swear there wasn't any. Gun. Well, he did pick it up, fortunately, Good Indian returned grimly. I'm glad the thing was settled so easily. She looked up at him sharply for a moment, opened her lips to ask a question, and then thought better of it. Oh, here's your handkerchief, she said quietly, taking it from the bottom of her wastebasket. As you say, the thing is settled. I'm going to turn you out now. The 4:35 is due pretty soon, and I have oodles of work. He looked at her strangely and went away, wondering why Miss Georgie hated so to have him in the office lately. On the next day, at 10 o'clock, they buried Saunders on a certain little knoll among the sagebrush. Buried him without much ceremony, it is true, but with more respect than he had received when he was alive and shambling sneakily among them. Good Indian was there, saying little and listening attentively to the comments made upon the subject, and when the last bit of yellow gravel had been spatted into place, he rode down through the Indian camp on his way home, thankful that everyone seemed to accept the verdict of suicide as being final, and anxious that Rachel should know it. He felt rather queer about Rachel, sorry for her in an impersonal way, curious over her attitude toward life in general and toward himself in particular, and ready to do her a good turn because of her interest. But Rachel, when he reached the camp, was not visible. Peppa-G Jim was sitting peacefully in the shade of his wickiup when Grat rode up, and he merely grunted in reply to a question or two. Good Indian resolved to be patient. He dismounted and squatted upon his heels beside Peppa-G, offered him tobacco, and dipped a shiny new nickel toward a bright-eyed papoose in scanty raiment, who stopped to regard him inquisitively. I just saw them bury Saunders, Good Indian remarked, by way of opening a conversation. You believe he shot himself? Peppa-G took his little stone pipe from his lips, blew a thin wreath of smoke, and replaced the stem between his teeth, stared stolidly straight ahead of him, and said nothing. All the white men say that, Good Indian persisted after he had waited a minute. The Bajee did not seem to hear. Sheriff say that too. Sheriff found the gun. Mebbe so sheriff man's heap damn full. Mebbe so heap smart, no sob. Good Indian studied him silently. Reticence was not a general characteristic of Peppa-G. It seemed to indicate a thorough understanding of the whole affair. He wondered if Rachel had told her uncle the truth. "Where's Rachel?" he asked suddenly, the words following involuntarily his thought. Peppa-G sucked hard upon his pipe, took it away from his mouth, and knocked out the ashes upon a pole of the wickiup frame. "Yo no speakum Rachel no more," he said gravely. "You catch vodna, no catch all the squaw. Bad medicine come, heap much troubles come. Me no leak 'em. My heart heap bad. I'm Rachel's friend, Peppa-G." Good Indian spoke softly so that others might not hear. "I sabe what Rachel do. Rachel good girl. I don't want to bring trouble. I want to help." Peppa-G snorted. "Yo make heap bad hard for Rachel," he said sourly. "Yo like for be friend, yo no, come no more mebbe so. no speak 'em, bimibiso no have bad hard no more. Que bueno, yo white mans, Rachel mebiso think 'em all time yo Indian, mebiso think 'em be yo squaw. Que bueno, yo all time white mans, no speak 'em Rachel no more, yo be friend. Yo speak 'em, me like to kill yo me be so. He spoke calmly, but nonetheless his words carry conviction of his sincerity. Within the wickiup, Good Indian heard a smothered sob. He listened, heard it again, and looked challengingly at Pepiji. But Pepiji gave no sign that he either heard the sound or saw the challenge in Good Indian's eyes. "I Rachel's friend," he said, speaking distinctly with his face half turned toward. The wall of deerskin. I want to tell Rachel what the sheriff said. I want to thank Rachel and tell her I'm her friend. I don't want to bring trouble. He stopped and listened, but there was no sound within. Peebajee eyed him comprehendingly, but there was no yielding in his brown, wrinkled face. Yo Rachel's frien yo pikeway, he insisted doggedly. From under the wall of the wickiup, close to Good Indian on the side farthest from Pepajee, a small leafless branch of sage was thrust out, and waggled cautiously, scraping gently his hand. Good Indian's fingers closed upon it instinctively, and felt it slowly withdrawn until his hand was pressed against the hide wall. Then soft fingers touched his own, fluttered there timidly, and left in his palm a bit of paper, tightly folded. Good Indian closed his hand upon it and stood up. "All right, I go," he said calmly to Pepajee, and mounted. Pepajee looked at him stolidly and said nothing. "One thing I would like to know." Good Indian spoke again. "You don't care any more about the men taking Peaceful's ranch. Before they came, you watch all the time you heap care. Why you no care any more? Why you no help?" Pepajee's mouth straightened in a grin of pure irony. "All time Bomberga try for catch 'em ranch, me try for stop 'em," he retorted. "You'll no believe 'em. Pays file no believe 'em. Pays file no believe 'em. Me tellium yo cloud sign. Tellium yo smoke sign. Tellium yo hear much bad talk for catch 'em ranch. Yo all time think for catch 'em vadna squaw. No think for stop 'em mins. Yo all time let mins come catch 'em ranch. You'll say fight 'em in co-taint. Cloud sign say me do nodding. Yo let 'em come. Yo mebiso mack 'em go. May no care." "I see. Well, maybe you're right." He tightened the reins and rode away, the tight little wad of paper still hidden in his palm. When he was quite out of sight from the camp and jogging leisurely down the hot trail, he unfolded it carefully and looked at it long. His face was grave and thoughtful when at last he tore it into tiny bits and gave it to the hot desert wind. It was a pitiful little message printed laboriously upon a scrap of brown wrapping paper. It said simply, "God bye, I love yo." Chapter 23. The Malice of a Squaw. Good Indian looked in the hammock, but Evadna was not there. He went to the little stone bench at the head of the pond, and when he still did not see her, he followed the bank around to the milk house, where was a mumble of voices. And, standing in the doorway with her arm thrown around her Aunt Phoebe's shoulders in a pretty protective manner, he saw her, and his eyes gladdened. She did not see him at once. She was facing courageously the three inseparables. Hagar, Vinny, and Lucy squatted at the top of the steps, and she was speaking her mind rapidly and angrily. Good Indian knew that tone of old, and he grinned. Also, he stopped by the corner of the house and listened shamelessly. "That is not true," she was saying very clearly. "You're a bad old squaw and you tell lies. You ought to be put in jail for talking that way." She pressed her aunt's shoulder affectionately. Don't you mind a word she says, Aunt Phoebe? She's just a mischief-making old hag, and I'd like to beat her. Hagar shook her head violently, and her voice rose shrill and malicious, cutting short Evadna's futile defiance. "Ca ay bueno, yo." Her teeth gnashed together upon the words. "I no tell him lie. Good Injun him kill man that coughs. All time I saw youm creep through sagebrush. All time I saw youm hoss wait where much rock row. I saw youm. I no speak 'em heap lie. Speak 'em true. I go tell sheriff mans, good Indian kill 'em, man that coughs. I tell 'em, why didn't you then when the sheriff was in Hartley?" Evadna flung at her angrily. "Because you know it's a lie. That's why. Yo think 'em good Injun love yo, me biz." Hagar's witch grin was at its malevolent widest. Her black eyes sparkled with venom. "Yo heap fool. Good. Injun go all time squaw talk far off. Speak 'em glad word. Good Injun calle bueno. Love squaw talk far off. No love yo. Speak 'em lies yo. Mock 'em your heap. Cry all time. Mack 'em yo heartbed." She cackled and leered with vile significance toward the girl in the doorway. "Don't you listen to her, honey." It was Phoebe's turn to reassure. Good Indian took a step forward, his face white with rage. Vinny saw him first, muttered an Indian word of warning, and the three sprang up and backed away from his approach. "So you've got to call me a murderer," he cried, advancing threateningly upon Hagar, "and even that doesn't satisfy you." Evadna rushed up the steps like a crisp little whirlwind and caught his arm tightly in her two hands. "Grant, we don't believe a word of it. You couldn't do a thing like that. Don't we now? Don't pay any attention to her. We aren't going to. It'll hurt her." "Worse than any kind of punishment we could give her. Oh, she's a zixalo old thing, too vile for words. Aunt Phoebe and I shouldn't belittle ourselves by even listening to her. SHE can't do any harm unless we let it bother us what she says. I know you never could take a human life, Grant. It's foolish even to speak of such a thing. It's just her nasty lying tongue saying what her black old heart wishes could be true." She was speaking in a torrent of trepidation lest he break from her and do some violence which they would all regret. She did not know what he could do or would do, but the look of his face frightened her. Old Hagar spat viciously at them both, and shrilled vituperative sentences in her own tongue fortunately. Else the thing she said must have brought swift retribution, and as if she did not care for consequences and wanted to make her words carry a definite sting, she stopped, grinned maliciously, and spoke the choppy dialect of her tribe. "Yo tell 'em we show nation, mebbe so yo tell 'em yo, no catch 'em squat talk far off in sagebrush, all time Saunders go dead. Me catch 'em hair squaw talk far off hair. You like for see, you think of me tell lies." From under her blanket, she thrust forth a greasy brown hand and shook triumphantly before them a tangled wisp of woman's hair, the hair of Miss Georgie, without a doubt. There was no gainsaying that color and texture. She looked full at Evadna. "Yo like see me show where 'em walk," she said grimly. "Good Injun boot make track squaw talk far off little shoe make track. Me show yo, think 'em mebe's o me, tell lie, stop 'em in sagebrush, catch 'em hair. Me catch 'em knife, good Injun knife, me be so." Revenge mastered cupidity, and she produced that also and held it up where they could all see. Evadna looked and winced. "I don't believe a word you say," she declared stubbornly. "You stole that knife. I suppose you also stole the hair. You can't make me believe a thing like that. Squaw talk far off run. Run heap fast. Get home quick. Me see 'em, Vinny see 'em. Lucy see 'em." Hagar pointed to each as she named her and waited until they give a confirmatory nod. The two squaws gazed steadily at the ground, and she grunted and ignored them afterward, content that they bore witness to her truth in that one particular. "Squaw talk far off save good Injun. Kill 'em. Man that coughs mebby so," she hazarded, watching Good Indian's face cunningly to see if the guest struck close to the truth. "If you've said all you want to say, you better go," Good Indian told her after a moment of silence while they glared at each other. "I won't touch you because—" "You're such a devil, I couldn't stop short of killing you once I laid my hands on you." He stopped, held his lips tightly shut upon the curses he would not speak, and Evadna felt his biceps tauten under her fingers as if he were gathering himself for a lunge at the old squaw. She looked up beseechingly into his face, and saw that it was sharp and stern, as it had been that morning when the men had first been discovered in the orchard. He raised his free arm and pointed imperiously to the trail. "Pike way," he commanded. Vinny and Lucy shrank from the tone of him and, hiding their faces in a folded blanket, slunk silently away like dogs that have been whipped and told to go. Even Hagar drew back a pace, hardy as was her untamed spirit. She looked at Evadna clinging to his arm, her eyes wide and startlingly blue and horrified at all. She had heard. She laughed. Then did Hagar and waddled after the others, her whole body seeming to radiate contentment with the evil she had wrought. "There's nothing on earth can equal the malice of an old squaw," said Phoebe, breaking into the silence which followed. "I'd hoped you don't go around peddling that story, not that anyone would believe it." But Good Indian looked at her and at Evadna. He opened his lips for speech and closed them without saying a word. That near he came to telling them the truth about meeting Miss Georgie and explaining about the hair and the knife and the footprints Hagar had prated about. But he thought of Rachel and knew that he would never tell anyone, not even Evadna. The girl loosened his arm and moved toward her aunt. "I hate Indian squaws especially," she said positively. "I hate the way they look at one with their beady eyes, just like snakes. I believe that horrid old thing lies." Awake nights just thinking up nasty, wicked lies to tell about the people she doesn't like. "I don't think you ought to ride around alone so much, Grant. She might murder you." "It's in her to do it if she ever got the chance." "What do you suppose made her ring Georgie Howard and like that?" Phoebe speculated, looking at Grant. "She must have some grudge against her, too. I don't know why." Good Indian spoke unguardedly because he was still thinking of Rachel and those laboriously printed words which he had scattered afar. "She's always giving them candy and fruit whenever they show up at the station." "Oh." Evadna gave the word that peculiar, slighting inflection of hers which meant so much, and regarded him unwinkingly with her hands clasped behind her. Good Indian knew well the meaning of both her tone and her stare, but he only laughed and caught her by the arm. "Come on over to the hammock," he commanded, with all the arrogance of a lover. "We're making that old hag altogether too important, it seems to me. Come on, Goldilocks. We haven't had a real satisfying sort of scrap for several thousand years." She permitted him to lead her to the hammock and pile 3 cushions behind her head and shoulders with a dark blue one on top, because her hair looked well against it, and disposed himself comfortably where he could look his fill at her while he swung the hammock gently with his boot heel, scraping a furrow in the sand. But she did not show any dimples, though his eyes and his lips smiled together when she looked at him, and when he took up her hand and kissed each fingertip in turn, she was as passive as a doll under the caresses of a child. "What's the matter?" he demanded when he found that her manner did not soften. "Worrying still about what that old squaw said?" "Not in the slightest." Evadna's tone was perfectly polite, which was a bad sign. Good Indian thought he saw the makings of a quarrel in her general attitude, and he thought he might as well get at once to the real root of her resentment. "What are you thinking about? Tell me, Goldilocks," he coaxed, pushing his own troubles to the back of his mind. "Oh, nothing. I was just wondering, Bill. It's a trivial matter which is hardly worth mentioning, but I just happened to wonder how you came to know that Georgie Howard is in the habit of giving candy to the squaws or anything else. I'm sure I never—" She bit her lips as if she regretted having said so much. Good Indian laughed. In truth, he was immensely relieved. He had been afraid. She might want him to explain something else, something which he felt he must keep to himself, even in the face of her anger. But this he laughed again. "That's easy enough," he said lightly. "I seen her do it a couple of times. Maybe Hagar has been keeping an eye on me, I don't know. Anyway, when I've had occasion to go to the store or to the station, I've nearly always seen her hanging around in the immediate vicinity. I went a couple of times to see Miss Georgie about this land business. She's wise to a lot of law, used to help her father before he died, it seems. And she has some of his books, I discovered. I wanted to see if there wasn't some means of kicking these fellows off the ranch without making a lot more trouble for Old Peaceful. But after I'd read up and talked the thing over with her, we decided that there wasn't anything to be done till Peaceful comes back, and we know what he's been doing about it. That's what's keeping him, of course." "I suppose," he added, looking at her frankly, "I should have mentioned my going there, but to tell you the truth, I didn't think anything much about it. It was just business, and when I'm with you, Miss Goldilocks, I like to forget my troubles. You," he declared, his eyes glowing upon her, "are the antidote. And you wouldn't have Mo believe you could possibly be jealous." "No," said Evadna in a more amiable tone. "Of course I'm not. But I do think you showed a lack of confidence in me. I don't see why I can't help you share your troubles. You know I want to. I think you should have told me and let me help, but you never do. Just for instance, why wouldn't you tell me yesterday where you were before breakfast?" "I know you were awesome, Marais, because I looked all over the place for you," she argued naively. "I always want to know where you are. It's so lonesome when I don't know." And you see, she was interrupted at that point, which was not strange. The interruption lasted for several minutes, but Evadna was a persistent little person. When they came back to mundane matters, she went right on with what she had started out to say. "You see, that gave old Hagar a chance to accuse you of a meeting with Georgie, which I don't believe, of course. Still, it does seem as if you might have told me in the first place where you had been, and then I could have shut her up by letting her see that I knew all about it. The horrid, mean old thing, to say such things, right to your face. And Grant, where did she get hold of that knife, do you suppose, and that bunch of hair?" She took his hand of her own accord and patted it, and Evadna was not a demonstrative kind of person usually. "It wasn't just a tangle, like combings," she went on slowly. "I noticed particularly there was a lock as large almost as my finger that looked as if it had been cut off, and it certainly was Georgie's hair." "Georgie's hair," Good Indian smilingly asserted, "does it interest me a little bit. Maybe Hagar scalped Miss Georgie to get it. If it had been Goldie, I'd have taken it away from her if I had to annihilate the whole tribe, but seeing it wasn't your hair, Well, the argument as such was a poor one, to say the least, but it had the merit of satisfying Evadna as mere logic could not have done, and seemed to allay as well all the doubt that had been accumulating for days past in her mind. But an hour spent in a hammock in the shadiest part of the grove could not wipe out all memory of the past few days, nor quiet the uneasiness which had come to be good Indian's portion. "I've got to go up on the hill again right after dinner, squaw with sun hair," he told her at last. "I can't rest somehow, as long as those gentlemen are camping down in the orchard. You won't mind, will you?" Which shows that the hour had not been spent in quarreling, at all events. "Certainly not," Evadna replied calmly, "because I'm going with you." "Oh, you needn't get ready to shake your head. I'm going to help you, from now on, and talk law, and give advice and scout around, as you call it. I couldn't be easy a minute with old Hagar on the warpath the way she is. I'd imagine all sorts of things. You don't realize how hot it is," he discouraged. "I can stand it if you can, and I haven't seen Georgie for days. She must get horribly lonesome, and it's a perfect shame that I haven't been up there lately. I'm sure she wouldn't treat Emmy that way." Evadna had put on her angelic expression. "I would go oftener," she declared virtuously, "only you boys always go off without saying anything about it, and I'm silly about riding past that Indian camp alone. That squaw, the one that caught Huckleberry the other day, would hardly let go of the bridle. I was scared to death, only I wouldn't let her see. I believe now she's in with old Hagar, Grant. She kept asking me where you were, and looked so. I think, on the whole, we better wait till after supper when it's cooler, Golden Hair," good Indian observed, which he hesitated over something she had not quite decided to say. "I suppose I really ought to stay and help the boys with that clover patch that Mother Hart is worrying so about. I guess she thinks we're a lazy bunch. All right, when the old man's gone. We'll go up this evening if you like." Evadna eyed him with open suspicion, but if she could read his real meaning from anything in his face or his eyes or his manner, she must have been a very keen observer indeed. Good Indian was meditating what he called making a sneak. He wanted to have a talk with Miss Georgie himself, and he certainly did not want Evadna, of all people, to hear what he had to say. For just a minute he wished that they had quarreled again. He went down to the stable, started to saddle Kino, and then decided that he would not. After all, Hagar's gossip could do no real harm, he thought, and it could not make much difference if Miss Georgie did not hear of it immediately. Chapter 24. Peaceful Returns. That afternoon, when the 4:35 rushed in from the parched desert and slid to a panting halt beside the station platform, Peaceful Heart emerged from the smoker, descended quietly to the blistering planks, and nodded through the open window to Miss Georgie and her instrument taking train orders. Behind him perspired Bainberger, purple from the heat and the beer with which he had sought to allay the discomfort of that searing sunlight. "Howdy, Miss Georgie," he wheezed as he passed the window. "Ever see such hot weather in your life? I never did." Miss Georgie glanced at him while her fingers rattled her key, and it struck her that Baumgartner had lost a good deal of his oily amiability since she saw him last. He looked more flabby and loose-lipped than ever, and his leering eyes were streaked plainly with the red veins which told of heavy drinking. She gave him a nod, cold enough to lower the thermometer several degrees, and scribbled away upon the yellow pad under her hand, as if Baumberger had sunk into the oblivion her temper wished for him. She looked up immediately, however, and leaned forward so that she could see Peaceful just turning to go down the steps. "Oh, Mr. Hart, will you wait a minute?" she called clearly above the puffing of the engine. "I've something for you here. Soon as I get this train out." She saw him stop and turn back to the office and let it go at that for the present. "I sure have got my nerve," she observed mentally when the conductor had signaled the engineer and swung up the steps of the smoker, and the wheels were beginning to clank. All she had for Peaceful Heart in that office was anxiety over his troubles. "Just held him up to pry into his private affairs," she put it bluntly to herself. But she smiled at him brightly and waited until Baumberger had gone lumbering with rather uncertain steps to the store, where he puffed up the steps and sat heavily down in the shade where Pete Hamilton was resting after the excitement of the past 36 hours. "I lied to you, Mr. Hart," she confessed engagingly. "I haven't a thing for you except a lot of questions, and I simply must ask them or die. I'm not just curious, you know. I'm horribly anxious. Won't you take the seat of honor, please? The ranch won't run off if you aren't there for a few minutes after you had expected to be. I've been waiting to have a little talk with you, and I simply couldn't let the opportunity go by." She talked fast, but she was thinking faster and wondering if this calm, white-bearded old man thought her a meddlesome fool. "There's time enough, and it ain't worth much right now," Peaceful said, sitting down in the Barabin rocker and stroking his beard in his deliberate fashion. "It seems to be getting the fashion to be anxious," he drawled, and waited placidly for her to speak. "You just about swear by old Baumberger, don't you?" she began presently. Fiddling with her lead pencil and going straight to the heart of what she wanted to say. "Well, I don't know. I've kind of learned to fight shy of swearing by anybody, Miss Georgie." His mild blue eyes settled attentively upon her flushed face. "That's some encouragement anyhow," she sighed, "because he's the biggest old blackguard in Idaho, and more treacherous than any Indian ever could be if he tried. I just thought I'd tell you, in case you didn't know it. I'm certain as I can be of anything that he's at the bottom of this placer claim fraud, and he's just digging your ranch out from under your feet while he wheedles you into thinking he's looking after your interests. I'll bet you never got an injunction against those 8 men," she hazarded, leaning toward him with her eyes sparkling as the subject absorbed all her thoughts. "I'll bet anything he kept you fiddling around until those fellows all filed on their claims. And now it's got to." Go till the case is finally settled in court, because they are technically within their rights in making lawful improvements on their claims. "Grant," she said, and her voice nearly betrayed her when she spoke his name, "was sure they faked the gold samples they must have used in filing. We both were sure of it. He and the boys tried to catch them at some crooked work. But the nights have been too dark, for one thing, and they were always on the watch, and went up to Shoshone in couples, and there was no telling which two meant to sneak off next. So, they have all filed, I suppose. I know the whole 8 have been up. Yes, they've all filed 20 acres apiece, the best part of the ranch. There's a 40 runs up over the bluff. The lower line takes in the house and barn and down into the garden, where the man they call Stanley run his line through the strawberry patch. That 40's mine yet. It's part of the homestead." "Meadowland is most all included. That was a preemption claim." Peaceful spoke slowly, and there was a note of discouragement in his voice which it hurt Miss Georgie to hear. "Well, they've got to prove that those claims of theirs are lawful, you know, and if you got your patent for the homestead, you have got a patent, haven't you?" Something in his face made her fling in the question. "U.S. or I thought I had one," he answered dryly. "It seems now there's a flaw in it, and it's got to go back to Washington and be rectified. It ain't legal till that's been done. Miss Georgie half rose from her chair and dropped back despairingly. Who found that mistake? She demanded. Baumberger? Yes, Baumberger. He thought we better go over all the papers ourselves, so the other side couldn't spring anything on us unawares, and there was one paper that hadn't been made out right, so it had to be fixed, of course. Baumberger was real put out about it. Oh, of course! Miss Georgie went to the window to make sure of the gentleman's whereabouts. He was still sitting upon the store porch, and he was just in the act of lifting a tall glass mug of beer to his gross mouth when she looked over at him. Pig! She gritted under her breath. It's a pity he doesn't drink himself to death. She turned and faced Peaceful anxiously. You spoke a while ago as if you didn't trust him implicitly, she said. I firmly believe he hired those 8 men to file on your land. I believe he also hired Saunders to watch Grant, for some reason, perhaps because Grant has shown his hostility from the first. Did you know Saunders or someone has been shooting at Grant from the top of the bluff ever since you left? The last shot. Clipped his hat brim, then Saunders was shot or shot himself according to the inquest, and there has been no more rifle practice with Grant for the target. No, I hadn't heard about that. Peaceful pulled hard at his beard so that his lips were drawn slightly apart. I don't mind telling you, he added slowly, that I've got another lawyer working on the case, Black. He hates Bonger, and he'd like to get something on him. I don't want Baumberger should know anything about it, though. He takes it for granted I swallow whole everything he says and does, but I don't. Not by a long shot. Black'll ferret out any crooked work. He's a dandy if he catches Baumberger, Miss Georgie averred gloomily. I tried a little detective work on my own account. I hadn't any right. It was about the cipher messages Saunders used to send and receive so often before your place was jumped. I was dead sure it was old Bonger at the other end, and I struck up a mild sort of flirtation with the operator at Shoshone. She smiled deprecatingly at Peaceful. I wanted to find out, and I did, by writing a nice letter or two. We have to be pretty cute about what we send over the wires, she explained. Though we do talk back and forth quite a lot, too. There was a news agent and cigar man, you know, that kind of joint, where they sell paper novels and magazines and tobacco and such, getting Saunders's messages. Jim Wakely is his name. He told the operator that he and Saunders were just practicing. They were going to be detectives, he said, and rigged up a cipher that they were learning together so they wouldn't need any code book. Pretty thin, that, but you can't prove it wasn't the truth. I managed to find out that Baumberger buys cigars and papers of Jim Wakely sometimes, not always, though. Miss Georgie laughed ruefully and patted her pompadour absent-mindedly. So all I got out of that, she finished, was a correspondence I could very well do without. I've been trying to quarrel with that operator ever since, but he's so darned easy-tempered. She went and looked out of the window again uneasily. He's guzzling beer over there, and from the look of him, he's had a good deal more than he needs already, she informed Peaceful. He'll burst if he keeps on. I suppose I shouldn't keep you any longer. He's looking this way pretty often, I notice. Nothing but the beer keg holds him, I imagine. And when he empties that, she shrugged her shoulders and sat down facing Hart. Maybe you could bribe Jim Wakely into giving something away, she suggested. I'd sure like to see Baumberger stub his toe in this deal. Or maybe you could get around one of those 8 beauties you've got camping down on your ranch, but there isn't much chance of that. He probably took good care to pick clams for that job. And Saunders, she added slowly, is eternally silent. Well, I hope in mercy you'll be able to catch him napping, Mr. Hart. Peaceful rose stiffly and took up his hat from where he had laid it on the table. I ain't as hopeful as I was a week ago. he admitted mildly. "But if there's any justice left in the courts, I'll save the old ranch. My wife and I worked hard to make it what it is, and my boys call it home. We can't save it by anything but law. Fightin' would only make a bad matter worse. I'm obliged to ya, Miss Georgie, for taking such an interest, and I'll tell Black about Jim Wakely." "Don't build any hopes on Jim," she warned. "He probably doesn't know anything except that he sent and received messages he couldn't read any sense into." "Well, there's always a way out, if we can find it. Come down and see us sometime. We still got a house to invite our friends to." He smiled drearily at her, gave a little old-fashioned bow, and went over to join Baumberger and to ask Pete Hamilton for the use of his team in buckboard. Miss Georgie, keeping an uneasy vigil over everything that moved in the barren portion of Hartley which her window commanded, saw Pete get up and start listlessly toward the stable, saw Peaceful sit down to wait, and then Pete drove up with the rig and they started for the ranch. She turned with a startled movement to the office door because she felt that she was being watched. "How, Hagar and Viney and Lucy?" she greeted languidly when she saw the three squaws sidle closer and reached for a bag of candy for them. Hagar's greasy paw stretched out greedily for the gift and placed it in jealous hiding beneath her blanket, but she did not turn to go, as she most frequently did after getting what she came for. Instead, she waddled boldly into the office, her eyes searching cunningly every corner of the little room. Vinny and Lucy remained outside, passively waiting. Hagar twitched at something under her blanket and held out her hand again. This time it was not empty. "Ketchum sagebrush," she announced laconically. "Mebbe so you'll like for buy?" Miss Georgie stared fixedly at the hand and said nothing. Hagar drew it under her blanket, held it fumbling there, and thrust it forth again. "Ketchum where ketchum hair," she said, and her wicked old eyes twinkled with malice. "Mebbe so you'll like for buy." Miss Georgie still stared and said nothing. Her under lip was caught tightly between her teeth by now, and her eyebrows were pulled close together. "Ketchum much track same place," said Hagar grimly. "Good Injun makeum track all same boot, same good Injun creep in bushes, all time man that cops be heap kill. Yo buy hair? Buy knife? Mebbe so me, no tell me see 'em good." "Injun, me tell, good. Injun go for jail. Mebbe so kill 'em rope." She made a horrible gesture of hanging by the neck. Afterward she grinned still more horribly. "Catch 'em plenty modala, me no tell, me be so." Miss Georgie felt blindly for her chair, and when she touched it she backed and sank into it rather heavily. She looked white and sick, and Hagar eyed her gloatingly. "Yo no like for good Injun be kill 'em rope," she chuckled. "Yo all time think 'em heap bueno. Mebbe so yo love, yo buy, yo pay you much dollar." Miss Georgie passed a hand slowly over her eyes. She felt numb, and she could not think, and she must think. A shuffling sound at the door made her drop her hand and look up. But there was nothing to lighten her oppressive sense of danger to Grant. Another squaw had appeared, was all. A young squaw with bright red ribbons braided into her shining black hair and great sad eyes. Brightening the dull copper tint of her face. "You no be 'fraid," she murmured shyly to Miss Georgie, and stopped where she was just inside the door. "You no be sad. No trouble come good, Injun, I friend." Hagar turned and snarled at her in short barking words which Miss Georgie could not understand. The young squaw folded her arms inside her bright plaid shawl and listened with an indifference bordering closely on contempt, one would judge from her mask-like face. Hagar turned from berating her and thrust out her chin at Miss Georgie. "I go. Son go, way mebbe so I come. Mebbe so your heart bad." Me catch 'em, much dollar yo. Me no tell 'em, maybe so. No catch 'em, me tell Sheriff Mance, good Injun, all time kill 'em, man that coughs. Turning, she waddled out, jabbing viciously at the young squaw with her elbow as she passed, and spitting out some sort of threat or command. Miss Georgie could not tell which. The young squaw lingered, still gazing shyly at Miss Georgie. You no be 'fraid, she repeated softly. I friend, I take care. No trouble come good Injun. I no let come. You no be sad. She smiled wistfully and was gone, as silently as moved her shadow before her on the cinders. Miss Georgie stood by the window with her fingernails making little red half-moons in her palms and watched the three squaws pad out of sight on the narrow trail to their camp, with the young squaw following after until only a black head could be seen bobbing over the brow of the hill. When even that was gone, she turned from the window and stood for a long minute with her hands pressed tightly over her face. She was trying to think, but instead she found herself listening intently to the monotonous "ah, shuck, ah, shuck" of the steam pump down the track and to the spasmodic clicking of an order from the dispatcher to the passenger train, 2 stations to the west. When the train was cleared and the wires idle, she went suddenly to the table, laid her fingers purposefully upon the key, and called up her chief. It was another 2 hours' leave of absence she asked for on urgent business. She got it, seasoned with a sarcastic reminder that her business was supposed to be with the railroad company and that she would do well to cultivate exactness of expression and a taste for her duties in the office. She was putting on her hat even while she listened to the message, and she astonished the man at the other end by making no retort whatever. She almost ran to the store, and she did not ask Pete for a saddle horse. She just threw her office key at him and told him she was going to take his bay, and she was at the stable before he closed the mouth he had opened in amazement at her whirlwind departure. Chapter 25. I just as soon hang for 9 bananas for one. Bomerger climbed heavily out of the rig and went lurching drunkenly up the path to the house where the cool shade of the grove was like paradise, set close against the boundary of the purgatory of blazing sunshine and scorching sand. He had not gone 10 steps from the stable when he met Good Indian face to face. "Hello," he growled, stopping short and eyeing him malevolently with lowered head. Good Indian's lips curled silently, and he stepped aside to pursue his way. Baumberger swung his huge body toward him. I said, "Hollo, nothing wrong in that, is there?" "Hollo, do you hear? Go to the devil," said Grant shortly. Baumberger leered at him offensively. "Pretty Polly! Never learned but one set of words in his life. Can't you say anything but go to the devil when a man speaks to ya? Hey, I could say a whole lot that you wouldn't be particularly glad to hear." Good Indian stopped and faced him coldly angry. For one thing, he knew that Evadne was waiting on the porch for him, and could see even as she could not hear, and Baumberger's attitude was insulting. "I think," he said meaningly, "I wouldn't press the point if I were you." "Giving me advice, hey? And who the devil are you?" "I wouldn't ask if I were you. But if you really want to know, I'm the fellow you hired Saunders to shoot. You blundered that time. You should have picked a better man, Mr. Bonger. Saunders couldn't have hit the side of a barn if he'd been locked inside it. You ought to have made sure." Baumberger glared at him and then lunged, his eyes like an animal gone mad. "I'll make a better job then," he bellowed. "Saunders was a fool. I told him to get down next the trail and make a good job of it." I told him to kill you, you lying renegade Injun, and if he couldn't, I can. Ya will watch me, hey." Good Indian backed from him in sheer amazement. Epithets unprintable poured in a stream from the loose, evil lips. Baumgurger was a raving beast of a man. He would have torn the other to pieces and reveled in the doing. He bellowed forth threats against Good Indian and the hearts, young and old, and vaunted rashly the things he meant to do. Heat mad and drink mad he was, and it was as if the dam of his wily amiability had broken and let loose the whole vile reservoir of his pirate mind. He tried to strike Good Indian down where he stood, and when his blows were parried, he stopped, swayed a minute in drunken uncertainty, and then make one of his cat-like motions, pulled a gun, and fired without really taking aim. Another gun spoke then, and Baumberger collapsed in the sand, a quivering heap of gross human flesh. Good Indian stood and looked down at him fixedly while the smoke floated away from the muzzle of his own gun. He heard Evadna screaming hysterically at the gate and looked over there inquiringly. Phoebe was running toward him, and the boys Wally and Jean and Jack from the blacksmith's shop. At the corner of the stable, Miss Georgie was sliding from her saddle, her riding whip clenched tightly in her hand as she hurried to him. Peaceful stood beside the team, with the lines still in his hand. It was Miss Georgie's words which reached him clearly. "You just had to do it, Grant. I saw the whole thing. You had to. Oh, Grant, what have you done? What have you done?" That was Phoebe Hart, saying the same thing over and over with a queer, moaning inflection in her voice. "Duh, kill him!" Jean shouted excitedly as he ran up to the spot. Yes, Good Indian glanced once more at the heap before him. "And I'm liable to kill a few more before I'm through with the deal." He swung short around, discovered that Evadna was clutching his arm and crying, and pulled loose from her with a gesture of impatience. With the gun still in his hand, he walked quickly down the road in the direction of the garden. "He's mad! The boy is mad! He's going to kill." Phoebe gave a sob and ran after him, and with her went Miss Georgie and Evadna, white-faced all three of them. "Come on, boys, he's going to clean out the whole bunch," whooped Jean. "Oh, choke off." Wally gritted disgustedly, glancing over his shoulder at them. "Go back to the house, and stay there. Ma, make Vad quit that yelling, can't ya?" He looked eloquently at Jack, keeping pace with him and smiling with the scene. Stilly glitter in his eyes. "Women make me sick," he snorted under his breath. Peaceful stared after them, went into the stable, and got a blanket to throw over Baumberger's inert body, stooped and made sure that the man was dead, with the left breast of his light negligee shirt all blackened with powder and soaked with blood, covered him well, and tied up the team. Then he went to the house and got the old rifle that had killed Indians and buffalo alike, and went quickly through the grove to the garden. He was a methodical man, and he was counted slow, but nevertheless he reached the scene not much behind the others. Wally was trying to send his mother to the house with Evadna, and neither would go. Miss Georgie was standing near Good Indian, watching Stanley with her lips pressed together. It is doubtful if Good Indian realized what the others were doing. He had gone straight past the line of stakes to where Stanley was sitting with his back against. The lightning-stricken apricot tree. Stanley was smoking a cigarette as if he had heard nothing of the excitement, but his rifle was resting upon his knee in such a manner that he had but to lift it and take aim. The three others were upon their own claims, and they, also, seemed unobtrusively ready for whatever might be going to happen. Good Indian appraised the situation with a quick glance as he came up, but he did not slacken his pace until he was within 10 feet of Stanley. "You're across the deadline, my son," said Stanley, with lazy significance. "And you too," he added, flickering a glance at Miss Georgie. "The deadline," said Good Indian coolly, "is beyond the point o' rocks. I'd like to see you on the other side by sundown." Stanley looked him over, from the crown of his gray hat to the tips of his riding boots, and laughed when his eyes came back to Good Indian's face. But the laugh died out rather suddenly at what he saw there. "Got the papers for that?" he asked calmly. But his jaw had squared. "I've got something better than papers. Your boss is dead. I shot him just now. He's lying back there by the stable." Good Indian tilted his head backward, without taking his eyes from Stanley's face, and Stanley's right hand too, perhaps. "If you don't want the same medicine, I'd advise you to quit." Stanley's jaw dropped, but it was surprise which slackened the muscles. "You shot Bainberger. I said it." "You'll hang for that," Stanley stated impersonally without moving. Good Indian smiled, but it only made his face more ominous. "Well, they can't hang a man more than once. I'll see this ranch cleaned up while I'm about it. I'd just as soon," he added composedly, "be hanged for 9 men as for one." Stanley sat on his haunches and regarded him unwinkingly for so long that Phoebe's nerves took a panic, and she drew Evadne away from the place. The boys edged closer, their hands resting suggestively upon their gun butts. Old Peaceful half raised his rifle and held it so. It was like being compelled to watch a fuse hiss and shrivel and go black toward a keg of gunpowder. "I believe by heck you would," said Stanley at last, and so long the time had elapsed that even Good Indian had to think back to know what he meant. Stanley squinted up at the sun, hitched himself up so that his back rested against the tree more comfortably, inspected his cigarette, and then fumbled for a match with which to relight it. How to find out Baumgartner was back of this deal? He asked curiously and without any personal resentment in tone or manner, and raked the match along his thigh. Good Indian's shoulders went up a little. "I knew, and that's sufficient. The deadline is down past the point o' rocks. After sundown this ranch is going to hold the Harts and their friends and no one a say. Tell that to your pals, unless you've got a grudge against them." Stanley held his cigarette between his fingers and blew smoke through his nostrils while he watched Good Indian turn his back and walk away. He did not easily lose his hold of himself, and this was with him a cold business proposition. Miss Georgie stood where she was until she saw that Stanley did not intend to. Shoot Good Indian in the back, as he might have done easily enough, and followed so quickly that she soon came up with him. Good Indian turned at the rustling of the skirts immediately behind him, and looked down at her somberly. Then he caught sight of something she was carrying in her hand, and he gave a short laugh. "What are you doing with that thing?" he asked peremptorily. Miss Georgie blushed very red and slid the thing into her pocket. "Well, every little helps," she retorted, with a miserable attempt at her old breeziness of manner. "I thought for a minute I'd have to shoot that man Stanley when you turned your back on him." Good Indian stopped, looked at her queerly, and went on again without saying a word. Chapter 26. When the Sun Goes Away. "I wish," said Phoebe, putting her 2 hands on Miss Georgie's shoulders at the gate and looking up at her with haggard eyes, "you'd see what you can do with Vadney. The poor child's near crazy. She ain't used to seeing such things happen. Where is she?" Good Indian asked tersely, and was answered immediately by the sound of sobbing on the east porch. The 3 went together, but it was Grant who reached her first. "Don't cry, Goldilocks," he said tenderly, bending over her. It's all right now. There isn't going to be any more. Oh, don't touch me. She sprang up and backed from him, horror plain in her wide eyes. Make him keep away, Aunt Phoebe. Good Indian straightened and stood perfectly still, looking at her in a stunned, incredulous way. Chicken, don't be silly. Miss Georgie's same tones were like a breath of clean air. You've simply gone all to pieces. I know what nerves can do to a woman. I've had 'em myself. Grant isn't going to bite you, and you're not afraid of him. You're proud of him, and you know it. He's acted the man, Chicken, the man we knew he was all along. So pull yourself together, and let's not have any nonsense. He killed a man. I saw him do it. And he's going to kill some more. I might have known he was like that. I might have can known when he tried to shoot me that night in the orchard when I was trying to scare Jean. I can show you the mark where he grazed my arm. And he you, Ched, about it. I called him a savage then, and I was right, only he can be so nice when he wants to be, and I forgot about the Indian in him, and then he killed Mr. Baumgartner. He's lying. Out there now. I'd rather die than let him. Miss Georgie clapped a hand over her mouth and stopped her. Also, she gripped her by the shoulder indignantly. Vadna Ramsay, I'm ashamed of you, she cried furiously. For heaven's sake, Grant, go on off somewhere and wait till she settles down. Don't stand there looking like a stone image. Didn't you ever see a case of nerves before? She doesn't know what she's saying. If she did, she wouldn't be saying it. You go on and let me handle her alone. Men are just a nuisance in a case like this. She pushed Evadna before her into the kitchen, waited until Phoebe had followed, and then closed the door gently and decisively upon Grant. But not before she had given him a heartening smile, just to prove that he must not take Evadna seriously, because she did not. We'd better take her to her room, Mrs. Hart, she suggested, and make her lie down for a while. That poor fellow, as if he didn't have enough on his hands without this. I'm not on his hands, and I won't lie down. Evadna jerked away from Miss Georgie and confronted them both pantingly, her cheeks still wet with tears. You act as if I don't know what I'm doing, and I do know. If I should lie down for 1,000,000 years, I'd feel just the same about it. I couldn't bear him to touch me. For heaven's sake, don't shout it, Miss Georgie interrupted exasperatedly. Do you want him to hear? I don't care whether he does or not. Evadna was turning sullen at the opposition. He'll have to know it sometime, won't he? If you think can forgive a thing like that and let... He had to do it. Baumberger would have killed him. He had a perfect right to kill. He'd have been a fool and a coward if he hadn't. You come and lie down a while. I won't lie down. I don't care if he did have to do it. I couldn't love him afterward. And he didn't have to go down there and threaten Stanley, and he'll do it. To it. She fell to trembling again. He'll do it at sundown. Phoebe and Miss Georgie looked at each other. He would if the men stayed. They knew that, and I was going to marry him. Evadna shuddered when she said it, and covered her face with her two hands. He wasn't sorry afterward. You could see he wasn't sorry. He was ready to kill more men. It's the Indian in him. He likes to kill people. He'll kill those men, and he won't be a bit sorry he did it. And he could come to me afterward and expect me. Oh, what does he think I am? She leaned against the wall and sobbed. I suppose, she wailed, lashing herself with every bitter thought she could conjure. He killed Saunders, too, like old Hagar said. He wouldn't tell me where he was that morning. I asked him, and he wouldn't tell. He was up there killing Saunders. If you don't shut up, I'll shake you. Miss Georgie, in her fury, did not wait, but shook her anyway, as if she had been a 10-year-old child in a tantrum. My heavens above! I'll stand for nerves and hysterics and almost any old thing, but you're going a little bit too far, my lady. There's no excuse for your talking such stuff as that, and you're not going to do it if I have to gag you. Now, you march to your own room, and stay there. Do you hear? And don't you dare let another yip out of you till you can talk sense. Good Indian stood upon the porch and heard every word of that. He heard also the shuffle of feet as Miss Georgie urged Evadne to her room. It sounded almost as if she dragged her there by force, and he rolled a cigarette with fingers that did not so much as quiver. He scratched a match upon the nearest post, and afterward leaned there and smoked, and stared out over the pond, and up at the bluff glowing yellow in the sunlight. His face was set and expressionless, except that it was stoically calm, and there was a glitter deep down in his eyes. Evadne was right. To a certain extent, the Indian hymn held him quiet. It occurred to him that someone ought to pick up Baumberger and put him somewhere, but he did not move. The boys and Peaceful must have stayed down in the garden, he thought. He glanced up at the tops of the nodding poplars and estimated idly by their shadow on the bluff how long it would be before sundown, and as idly wondered if Stanley and the others would go or stay. There was nothing they could gain by staying, he knew, now that Baumberger was out. Of it, unless they got stubborn and wanted to fight. In that case, he supposed he would eventually be planted alongside his father. He wished he could keep the boys and old Peaceful out of it in case there was a fight. But he knew that would be impossible. The boys, at least, had been itching for something like this ever since the trouble started. Good Indian had, not so long ago, spent hours in avoiding all thought that he might prolong the ecstasy of mere feeling. Now he had reversed the desire. He was thinking of this thing and of that, simply that he might avoid feeling. If someone didn't kill him within the next hour or so, he was going to feel something that would hurt him more than he had been hurt since his father died in that same house. But in the meantime he need only think. The shadow of the grove, with the long fingers of the poplars to point the way, climbed slowly up the bluff. Good Indian smoked another cigarette while he watched it. When a certain great boulder that was like a miniature ledge glowed rosily and then slowly darkened to a chill gray, he threw his cigarette stub unerringly at a lily pad which had courtesied many a time before to a like missile from his hand, pulled his hat down over his eyes, jumped off the porch, and started around the house to the gate which led to the stable. Phoebe came out from the sitting room, ran down the steps, and barred his way. "Grant," she said, and there were tears in her eyes, "don't do anything rash, don't. If it's for our sakes, and I know it is, don't do it. They'll go anyway. We'll have the law on them and make them go. But don't you go down there. You let Thomas handle that part. You're like one of my own boys. I can't let you go." He looked down at her commiseratingly. "I've got to go, Mother Hart. I've made my war talk." He hesitated, bent his head, and kissed her on the forehead as she stood looking up at him, and went on. "Grant, Grant!" she cried heartbrokenly after him, and sank down on the porch steps with her face hidden in her arms. Miss Georgie was standing beside the gate, looking toward the stable. She may not have been waiting for him, but she turned without any show of surprise when he walked up behind her. "Well, your jumpers seem to have taken the hint," she informed him with a sort of surface cheerfulness. Stanley is down there talking to Mr. Hart now, and the others have gone on. They'll all be well over the deadline by sundown. There goes Stanley now. Do you really feel that your future happiness depends on getting through this gate? Well, if you must, she swung it open, but she stood in the opening. Grant, it's hard to say just what I want to say, but you did right. You acted the man's part. No matter what others may think or say, remember that I think you did right to kill that man. And if there's anything under heaven that I can do to help you, let me do it, won't you? Her eyes held him briefly, unabashed at what they might tell. Then she stepped back and contradicted them with a little laugh. I will get fired sure for staying over my time, she said. I'll wire for the coroner soon as I get to the office. This will never come to a trial, Grant. He was like a crazy man, and we all saw him shoot first. She waited until he had passed through and was a third of the way to the stable where Peaceful Heart and his boys were gathered, and then she followed him briskly, as if her mind was taken up with her own affairs. It's a shame you fellows got cheated out of a scrap, she taunted Jack, who held her horse for her while she settled herself in the saddle. You were all spoiling for a fight, and there did seem to be the makings of a beautiful row, save for the fact that she kept her eyes studiously turned away from a certain place nearby where the dust was pressed down smoothly with the weight of a heavy body, and all around was trampled and tracked. One could not have told that Miss Georgie remembered anything tragic. But Good Indian seemed to recall something, and went quickly over to her just in time to prevent her starting. Was there something in particular you wanted when you came? He asked, laying a hand on the neck of the bay. It just occurred to me that there must have been. She leaned so that the others could not hear, and her face was grave enough now. Why, yes, it's old Hagar. She came to me this afternoon, and she had that bunch of hair you cut off that was snarled in the bush. She had your knife. She wanted me to buy them the old blackmailer. She made threats, Grant, about Saunders. She says you. I came right down to tell you, because I was afraid she might make trouble. But there was so much more on hand right here. She glanced involuntarily at the trampled place in the dust. She said she'd come back this evening, when the sun goes away. She's there now, most likely. What shall I tell her? We can't have that story mouthed all over the country. Good Indian twisted the wisp of mane in his fingers and frowned abstractedly. If you'll ride on slowly, he told her, at last straightening the twisted lock, I'll overtake you. I think I'd better see that old Jezebel myself. Secretly, he was rather thankful for further action. He told the boys when they fired questions at his hurried saddling that he was going to take Miss Georgie home, and that he would be back before long, in an hour probably. Then he galloped down the trail and overtook her at the point of rocks. The sun was down, and the sky was a great, glowing mass of color. Round the second turn of the grade they came upon Stanley, walking with his hands thrust in his trousers pockets and whistling softly to himself, as if he were thinking deeply. Perhaps he was glad to be let off so easily. Abandoning my claim, he announced, lightly as a man of his prosaic temperament could speak upon such a subject. Dern poor placer mining down there, if you want to know. Good Indian scowled at him and rode on because a woman rode beside him. 7 others they passed farther up the hill. Those 7 gave him scowl for scowl, and did not speak a word. That also because a woman rode beside him, and the woman understood and was glad that she was there. From the Indian camp, back in the sage-enclosed hollow, rose a sound of high-keyed wailing. The two heard it and looked at each other questioningly. "Something's up over there," Good Indian said, answering her look. "That sounds to me like the squaws howling over a death. Let's go and see. I'm so late now. A few minutes more won't matter, one way or the other." Miss Georgie pulled out her watch, looked at it, and made a little grimace. So they turned into the winding trail and rode into the camp. There were confusion and wailing and a buzzing of squaws around a certain wickiup. Dogs sat upon their haunches and howled lugubriously until someone in passing kicked them into yelping instead. Papooses stood nakedly about and regarded the uproar solemnly, running to peer into the wickiup and then scamper back to their less hardy fellows. Only the bucks stood apart in haughty unconcern, speaking in undertones when they talked at all. Good Indian. Commanded Miss Georgie to remain just outside the camp and himself rode in to where the bucks were gathered. Then he saw Peppa-Gee sitting beside his own wickiup and went to him instead. "What's the matter here, Peppa-Gee?" he asked. "Heap trouble walk down at Hart Ranch." "Trouble walk here all same, mebbe so?" Peppa-Gee looked at him sourly. But the news was big and it must be told. "Heap much trouble come. Squaw Callum Hagar make much talk. Do much bad mebbe so. Squaw Rachel catch him bad heart along yo. He cry all time. No sleep 'em, no eat 'em, all time heap sad. Catch him bad spirit mebbe so. Catch him debby so. Son go way catch him knife, go Hagar Ricky up. Kill him Hagar so." He thrust out his arm as one who stabs. "Kill him himself so." He struck his chest with his clenched fist. "Hagar heap dead. Rachel heap dead. Que bueno. Mebbe so yo heap bad medicine. Yo go." "A squaw just died," he told Miss Georgie curtly when they rode on. But her quick eyes noted a new look in his face. Before it had been grave and stern and bitter, now it was sorrowful instead. Chapter 27. Life adjustelt again to some thens. The next day was a day of dust hanging always over the grade because of much hurried riding up and down, a day of many strange faces whose eyes peered curiously at the place where Baumgartner fell, and at the cold ashes of Stanley's campfire, and at the hearts and their horses and all things pertaining in the remotest degree to the drama which had been played grimly there to its last, tragic curtain. They stared up at the rim rock and made various estimates of the distance and argued over the question of marksmanship and whether it really took a good shot to fire from the top and hit a man below. As for the killing of Baumgartner, public opinion tried with the aid of various plugs of tobacco and much expectoration the case, and rendered a unanimous verdict upon it long before the coroner arrived. Done just right, was the verdict of public opinion, and the self-constituted judges manifested their further approval by slapping Good Indian upon the back when they had a chance, or by solemnly shaking hands with him, or by facetiously assuring him that they would. Be good. All of which Grant interpreted correctly as sympathy and a desire to show him that they did not look upon him as a murderer, but as a man who had the courage to defend himself and those dear to him from a great danger. With everything so agreeably disposed of according to the crude, though none the less true, perhaps ethics of the time and the locality, it was tacitly understood that the coroner and the inquest he held in the grove beside the house were a mere concession to red tape. Nevertheless, a general tension manifested itself when the jury, after solemnly listening in their official capacity to the evidence they had heard and discussed freely hours before, bent heads and whispered briefly together. There was also a corresponding atmosphere of relief when the verdict of public opinion was called justifiable homicide by the coroner and so stamped with official approval. When that was done, they carried Bomberger's gross physical shell away up the grade to the station, and the dust of his passing settled upon the straggling crowd that censured his misdeeds and mourned not at all, and yet paid tribute to his dead body with lowered voices while they spoke of him, and with awed silence when the rough box was lowered to the station platform. As the sky clears and grows blue and deep and unfathomably peaceful after a storm, as trees wind-riven straighten and nod graciously to the little cloud boats that sail the blue above and wave dainty fingertips of branches in bon voyage, so did the peaceful Hart Ranch, when the dust had settled after the latest departure and the whistle of the train which bore the coroner and that other quiet passenger came faintly down over the rimrock, settle with a sigh of relief into its old easy habits of Lulsanieft. All, that is, save good Indian himself, and perhaps one other. Peaceful cleared his white mustache and beard from a few stray drops of coffee and let his mild blue eyes travel slowly around the table from one tanned young face to another. Now the excitement's all over and done with, he drawled in his half-apologetic tones. It wouldn't be a bad idea for you boys to get to work and throw the water back where it belongs. I don't know but what the garden's spoiled already, but the small fruit can be saved. Clark and I was going up to the Injun camp, spoke up Jean. We wanted to see you'll have to do some riding to get there. Good Indian informed them dryly. They hit the trail before sunrise this morning. Huh! What were you doing up there that time of day? Blurted Wally, eyeing him sharply, watching the sunrise. His lips smiled over the retort, but his eyes did not. I'll lower the water in your milk house now, Mother Hart, he promised lightly, so you won't have to wear rubber boots when you go to skim the milk. He gave Evadna a quick, sidelong glance as she came into the room and pushed back his chair. I'll get at it right away, he said cheerfully, picked up his hat, and went out, whistling. Then he put his head in at the door. Say, he called, does anybody know where that long-handled shovel is? Again he eyed Evadna without seeming to see her at all. If it isn't down at the stable, said Jack soberly, or by the apple cellar, or somewhere around the pond or garden, look along the ditches as far up as the big meadow. And if you don't run across it there, the door slammed, and Jack laughed with his eyes fast shut and 3 dimples showing. Evadna sank listlessly into her chair and regarded him and all her little world with frank disapproval. Upon my word, I don't see how anybody can laugh after what has happened on this place, she said dismally, or Dwisla, after her lips quivered a little. She was a distressed Christmas angel, if ever there was one. Wally snorted. Want us to go crying around because the row's over? He demanded. Think Grant ought to wear crepe, I suppose, because he ain't on ice this morning or in jail, which he'd hate a lot worse. Think we ought to go around with our jaws hanging down so you could step on 'em, because Bomberger cashed in? Huh! All hurts my feelings is, I didn't get a whack at the old devil myself. It was a long speech for Wally to make, and he made it with deliberate malice. Now you're shouting, applauded Jean, also with the intent to be shocking. That's the stuff, approved Clark, grinning at Evadna's horrified eyes. Grant can run over me sharp-shod and I won't say a word, for what he did day before yesterday, declared Jack, opening his eyes and looking straight at Evadna. You don't see any tears rolling down my cheeks, I hope. Good Injun's stuff, all right. He'd lick the whole damn now, Donnie. Be careful what language you use, Phoebe admonished, and so cut short his high-pitched song of praise. I don't care. I think it's perfectly awful. Evadna looked distastefully upon her breakfast. I just can't sleep in that room, Aunt Phoebe. I tried not to think about it, but it opens right that way. Huh, snorted Wally. Board up the window then, so you can't see the fatal spot. His gray eyes twinkled. I could dance on it myself, he said, just to. Horrify her, which he did. Evadna shivered, pressed her wisp of handkerchief against her lips, and left the table hurriedly. You boys ought to be ashamed of yourselves. Phoebe scolded half-heartedly, for she had lived long in the wild, and had seen much that was raw and primitive. You must take into consideration that Vadney isn't used to such things. Why, great grief! I don't suppose the child ever saw a dead man before in her life, unless he was laid out in church with flower anchors piled knee-deep all over him. And to see one shot right before her very eyes, and by the man she expects or did expect to marry, why, you can't wonder at her looking at it the way she does. It isn't Vaddy's fault. It's the way she's been raised. Well, observed Wally in the manner of delivering an ultimatum, excuse me from any Eastern raising. A little later, Phoebe boldly invaded the secret chambers of good Indian's heart. When he was readjusting the rocks which formed the floor of the milk-house. Now, Grant, she began, laying her hand upon his shoulder as he knelt before her, straining at a heavy rock, Mother Hart is going to give you a little piece of her mind about something that's none of her business, maybe. You can give me as many pieces as you like. They're always good medicine, he assured her, but he kept his head bent so that his hat quite hid his face from her. What about? He asked, a betraying tenseness in his voice. About Vadney and you. I notice you don't speak. You haven't that I've seen, since that day on the porch. You don't want to be too hard on her, Grant. Remember, she isn't used to such things. She looks at it different. She's never seen the times, as I have, where it's kill or be killed. Be patient with her, Grant, and don't feel hard. She'll get over it. I want. She stopped because her voice was beginning to shake. I want my biggest boy to be happy. Her hand slipped. Around his neck and pressed his head against her knee. Good Indian got up and put his arms around her and held her close. He did not say anything at all for a minute, but when he did, he spoke very quietly, stroking her hair the while. Mother Hart, I stood on the porch and heard what she said in the kitchen. She accused me of killing Saunders. She said I liked to kill people, that I shot at her and laughed at the mark I made on her arm. She called me a savage, an Indian. My mother's mother was the daughter of a chief. She was a good woman. My mother was a good woman, just as good as if she had been white. Mother Hart, I'm a white man in everything but half my mother's blood. I don't remember her, but I respect her memory, and I am not ashamed because she was my mother. Do you think I could marry a girl who thinks of my mother as something which she must try to forgive? Do you think I could go to that girl? In there, and take her in my arms and love her, knowing that she feels as she does? She can't even forgive me for killing that beast. She's a beautiful thing. I wanted to have her for my own. I'm a man. I've a healthy man's hunger for a beautiful woman, but I've a healthy man's pride as well. He patted the smooth cheek of the only woman he had ever known as a mother, and stared at the rough rock wall oozing moisture that dripped to the pool below. I did think I'd go away for a while, he said after a minute spent in sober thinking. But I never dodged yet, and I never ran. I'm going to stay and see the thing through now. I don't know. He hesitated and then went on. It may not last. I may have to suffer after a while, but standing out there, that day, listening to her carrying on, I can't explain it. But I don't believe I was half as deep in love as I thought I was. I don't want to say anything against her. I'm no. Right, for she's 1,000 times better than I am. But she's different. She never would understand our ways, Mother Heart, or look at life as we do. Some people go through life looking at the little things that don't matter and passing by the other, bigger things. If you keep your eye glued to a microscope long enough, you're sure to lose the sense of proportion. She won't speak to me, he continued after a short silence. I tried to talk to her yesterday, but you must remember, the poor child was hysterical that day when she went on so. She doesn't know anything about the realities of life. She doesn't mean to be hard. Yesterday, said Grant with an odd little smile, she was not hysterical. It seems that shooting was the last little weight that tilted the scale against me. I don't think she ever cared 2 whoops for me, to tell you the truth. She's been ashamed of my Indian blood all along. She said so. And I'm not a good lover. I neglected her all the while this trouble lasted, and I paid more attention to Georgie Howard than I did to her, and I didn't satisfactorily explain about that hair and knife that Hagar had. And oh, it isn't the killing altogether. I guess we were both a good deal mistaken in our feelings. Well, I hope so, sighed Phoebe, wondering secretly at the decadence of love. An emotion that could burn high and hot in a week, flare bravely for a like space, and die out with no seared heart to pay for the extravagance. She shook her head at it. That was not what she had been taught to call love, and she wondered how a man and a maid could be mistaken about so vital an emotion. I suppose, she added with unusual sarcasm for her, you'll be falling in love with Georgie Howard, next thing anybody knows, and maybe that will last a week or 10 days before you find out you were mistaken. Good Indian gave her one of his quick sidelong glances. She would not be eternally apologizing to herself for liking me anyway, he retorted acrimoniously, as if he found it very hard to forgive Evadna her conscious superiority of race and upbringing. Squaw. Oh, haven't a doubt of that. Phoebe rose to the defense of her own blood. I don't know as it's in her to apologize for anything. I never saw such a girl for going right ahead as if her way's the only way. Bull-headed, I'd call her. She looked at Good Indian afterward, studying his face with motherly solicitude. I believe you're half in love with her right now and don't know it, she accused suddenly. Good Indian laughed softly and bent to his work again. You, Grant? Phoebe laid a moist hand on his shoulder and felt the muscles sliding smoothly beneath his clothing while he moved a rock. I ain't mad because you and Daddy fell out. I kind of looked for it to happen. Love that grows like a mushroom lasts about as long, only I don't call it love. You might tell you what, but Grant did not look up. If I don't know it, I can't tell it. He paused in his lifting and rested his hands upon his knees, the fingers dripping water back into the spring. He felt that Phoebe was waiting, and he pressed his lips together. Must a man be in love with some woman all the time? He shook his fingers impatiently so that the last drops hurried to the pool. She's a good girl. And a brave girl, Phoebe remarked irrelevantly. Good Indian felt that she was still waiting, with all the quiet persistence of her sex when on the trail of a romance. He reached up and caught the hand upon his shoulder and laid it against his cheek. He laughed surrender. squaw talk far off heap smart," he mimicked old Peppa G gravely. "Heap bueno." He stood up as suddenly as he had started his rock lifting a few minutes before, and taking Phoebe by the shoulders, shook her with gentle insistence. "But don't make me fall out of one love right into another," he protested whimsically. "Give a fellow time to roll a cigarette, can't you?" The end. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey, the characters, and the world they carried with them. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. Your support helps keep these stories alive and allows more timeless books to be shared with listeners around the world. Until next time, thank you for listening.